Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Our learning this morning is sponsored by Jean Herskovitz in memory of her father, Chaim Avram ben Ephraim Fischel. Should be a merit for his neshama. Okay, beginning with chapter 32, verse 15. Chapter 32, verse 15. The context here is what happens when the Jewish people start doing what they're not supposed to do. So the idea is that God punishes us. Vayishman Yeshurun Vayivat. And Yeshurun, which is a name for the Jews sometimes used, gets fat and kicks out at God. Shamanta Avisa Kasisa. You, the Jewish people, have become fat and you've rebelled. Vayitosh Eloka Asahu. The Jewish people have turned away from the God who has made them. Vaynabel Tsurishwaso. And they have acted with disgust towards the rock of their salvation. Pretty strong pasuk. But I guess what's sort of interesting in the pasuk is usage of this term Yeshurun. If I were to ask you, quick guess, what term will the pasuk use for the Jewish people? My guess is you wouldn't have guessed Yeshurun. So it's interesting Sforno over here. Sforno on pasuk Tesva, Vayishman Yeshurun Vayivat. Vine gam ba'ale ha'iyun shebahem, hanikroim Yeshurun, min ashurenu v'lo karov. There's a pasuk in the Torah, I believe it's Bilam, ashurenu v'lo karov. I look at them and it's not close. Ashurenu is a language of gazing. So the Sforno says, you know why it says Yeshurun? Even the thoughtful people among Klal Yisrael, the one who are like Ashurenu, it's that shorosh of looking, the people who really have their eyes open in life, even then, they're like the animals that kick their masters who provide them with food. So that's the pshat, that he understands the pasuk, that even the more reflective, thoughtful, spiritually minded people are also falling by the wayside in terms of how they're living with God. An interesting thing to think about. Okay, let's go on to verse 20. Still God focusing on the Jewish people when they're not conducting themselves appropriately. Vayomer, God says, Astira fonai mehem, I will turn my face away from them. Erem o acharisam, I will see what will happen in their end. Kidor tapuchos hema, they are a generation of things being upside down. Banim lo emun bam, they are children without a emun. What does emun mean? Just what does the word mean? So it's an interesting Ramban over here. Ramban, it's the last Ramban on Pasuk Chaf. Banim lo emun bam, ki ein lahem uman umegadel. They are children who no one is dealing with them. No one is raising them. No one is instructing them. That the Jewish people are acting like they're neglected children. It's as if no one taught them how to live their lives. That's how the Ramban explains it. Let's jump over to Rashi, third Rashi on the pasuk lo emun bam, ein gidulai nikarim bahem. A little more specific than what the Ramban said. It's not apparent that I have raised them, says God. In other words, their relationship with me doesn't show in how they're acting. Ki horeisim derech tova, I've guided them on a good path, v'saru mimena, and they've turned away from it. Now, the Rashi then says a second pshat, skip about a line, davar acher, another pshat, emun lashon emun. I'm sure some of you were thinking this. Emun is a language of faith. Kitargumo, amru b'sinai nasa v'nishma. This is the nation that at Sinai, they said, God, we'll do whatever you say. Just tell us whatever it is. We're ready. And then at Har Sinai itself, they did the golden calf. So one pshat is it's as if they haven't been raised. Like it doesn't show that they were raised properly, even by God himself. And the other pshat is they're not living with a sense of faith in God. Let's go to the Orach Chaim. Second Orach Chaim on Pasuk Chaf, Banim. Perush, afilu yachshavu lehetiv, lavu al gedosh yu nechshavim banim. He says, you know what the pasuk means? Even when they're getting their act together, And even when they say, you know what, we're going to serve God and we're going to serve God the right way, lo emun bam. It's not there. Ki yashuvu le'arshia ve'in chazarasim shlema. So even when they want to act like banim, even when they want to act like true children, if you remember, we discussed this yesterday. I can't remember which commentator, but banim versus avodim. So even when they're ready to really step up to the plate, it doesn't stay. It doesn't hold up. That's how the Orach Chaim explains the pasuk. All interesting ideas. Okay, let's jump ahead to verse 36 now. Sorry, verse 36. Maybe we'll skip this for now. If there's time, we'll come back to it. Let's go to verse 40. There's a Ramban on verse 40. Ramban on Pasuk Mem. It's about halfway through the Ramban on Pasuk Mem. V'hine hashira hazos asher hibanu le'ed emes v'ne'aman. This song, remember, Parshas Hazinu is referred to as a song. Tagid b'beyor kol hamotzos osanu. This song tells us clearly everything that will befall us. His kira tchila chesed she'asa imanu HaKadosh Baruch Hu me'az shelakachnu l'chelko. It begins by talking about the kindness that God performed for us when He took us as His chosen nation. V'izkira tovo she'asa lanu b'midbar. Then it talks about the goodness that He bestowed upon us in the desert. V'asher inchilanu artzos hagoyim hagdolim v'atzumim. And these lands of these mighty and powerful nations, God gave those lands to us. V'rov hatova v'ha'osher v'ha'kavod, and the tremendous goodness and wealth and honor asher inchilanu ba, which He bestowed upon us. V'chi merov kol tova mardu b'Hashem lavod avodah zarah. And again, it's this tremendous paradox which comes up all the time with us. When everything is going great, that's when we rebel against God. And it's totally counterintuitive, but we forget God at that moment. V'izkira kas asher haya milfanav aleim. Then it talks about the wrath that God brings down upon the Jewish people because we haven't conducted ourselves appropriately. Ad sheshalach bahem ba'artzam dever v'ra v'chayo ra v'cheref. Till He brings upon them plague and famine and beasts and the sword. And then God spreads out the Jewish people in all directions of the earth. And it's known that all of this has happened. And it was indeed so. So that all the goodness that God did to us in the beginning, the fact that we messed up, it's our fault. That's a theme that we saw earlier in the Parsha. And then the punishment from God. Okay, I want to go further to verse 44. We're probably going to end up doubling back to something earlier, but I just wanted to make sure to get to this because I think people find this more interesting, I think. Verse 44. So that's the end of the song. Vayavo Moshe, and Moshe came, and he imparted all of the words of this song in the ears of the people. Who? Hoshea bin Nun. Moshe and Hoshea. Remember, Hoshea is the person who's about to assume the mantle of leadership. Moshe has already conveyed that to Jewish people. Moshe and Hoshea together have now imparted to the Jews this song, which is lessons for life. Okay, why does it refer to him as Hoshea? Why isn't it referred to him as Yoshua? I mean, he's known by Yoshua by this point, right? The whole story was, the normal understanding is he was born as Hoshea, and Moshe changed his name to Yoshua in the lead up to going with the spies into Israel, right? It's a famous medrash. So what's going on with this? Let's start with Rashi. Rashi on Pasuk Mem Dalet. First of all, the beginning of the Rashi is interesting. Shabbos shel Diyuski Haisa. It was a Shabbos of like a pairing in terms of leadership. Nit l'rishus mizeh v'nitna mizeh. That like you saw the transition from Moshe to Yoshua on that Shabbos. Hemid lo Moshe meturgaman liYoshua. She dorish b'chayov. Kedei shelo yomru Yisrael b'chayi rabach lo hayalach lo rosh. Very interesting. So Moshe set up Yoshua that he should publicly speak to the people while Moshe was still alive. People shouldn't get the impression that Yoshua was only worthy of speaking to the people once Moshe is out of the way. So while with Moshe looking on, Yoshua speaks to the people. So he says that's the idea, that Moshe and Yoshua conveyed this song to the Jewish people together. Vilama Koreu Kan Hoshua. Hosea, excuse me. Why is he called Hosea here and not Yoshua? Lomar, it's to teach. So lo zachadato alav, that he didn't change his attitude. She'af al pi shenitna lo gedula, even though he now had risen to this uniquely prominent place in Klal Yisrael, hishmil atzmo kasher mitchilaso. He carried himself like the old Hosea before he even had the role of being one of the spies. So the reason specifically here the Torah calls him Hosea is to convey that even though he was given this prominence in the moment, he carried himself like he hadn't been given this unique prominence. Nice pshat. Excuse me. By the way, the flip of it, if you look at the Orach Chaim, Pasuk Memdal, Hu Hosea Beinun, Perish, Haya Omed Imo. Yoshua stood there with Moshe, but the only speaker was Moshe, very different than what Rashi says. Rashi implies that they're both speaking. Why do you say that the only speaker was Moshe? He says it's easy. Ka'amro vaydaber. It says in the pasuk, Memdal, it says, and he spoke. Moshe spoke, he and Hosea. So how many people were speaking? If it was two people speaking, it said vaydabru. It said vaydaber. So it means that Moshe was the speaker and Hosea stood next to him while he spoke. Okay. The Amra of Hosea, v'lo Amra of Yoshua, Moshe. Why doesn't it refer to him as Yoshua? L'fisho Tosefes Hayud Hili Karuk Dula. That Yud at the beginning is as an honor to him. Karamus b'mamar ve'ikra Moshe Loshea. Moshe, right, this famous medrash that Moshe was giving it to him was like a bracha. Ucheshehishvam hakasov v'yamar hu Moshe binun heisir hayud al derech Amra yisquare hagarsen. So he says very differently than what Rashi said. Rashi says the reason it calls him Hosea is because he carried himself like he was the same old Hosea. The Orach Chaim says the reason it calls him Hosea is from the vantage point of the narrator of the Torah, right? He's not worthy of the Yud compared to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moshe Rabbeinu was Moshe. Yoshua's a poor comparison to Moshe. Yeshua's great, but he's no Moshe. So the Yud at the beginning is something of prominence. So the Torah wants us to understand that it's a whole different plane. That's what the Orach Chaim's pshat is. And finally, the Kli Yakar, Hu Hosea Binun, Vishalo Karo Yoshua, Ki Malshem Ko Yoshiach B'yat Samraglim. What does Rashi tell us by the story of the spies, why Moshe called him Yoshua? It was a prayer that God should save him from the bad ideas of the spies. As long as there were people from that generation still alive, who would have bad ideas, Moshe called him Yoshua. But now everybody's gone. All the villains of the story are all dead. So Vikaro Hosea. So it goes back to calling him Hosea. Interesting pshat. Obviously, it's difficult for this pshat. How do you understand what happens in Sefer Yehoshua, not Hosea, but Yoshua? But it's an interesting. I guess the pshat is, at least from Moshe's perspective, he didn't see the need to call him Yoshua anymore. An interesting thing. So just to sum up, we had a sforno about why it says Vayishman Yeshurut, that Jeshurun will become fat. We had various pshatim as what's meant, that they are children without an emun. We had different pshatim about that. We saw the Ramban sort of summary of the lessons of Parshas Hasinu, and we said Rashi, the Orach Chaim, and the Kli Yakar as the different pshatim as to why he's referred to as Hosea in this pasuk.